Hi, thank you for joining me. My name is Kara Kroger. I'm a certified nutritionist and culinarian. Today you're going to be watching one of my culinary classes that was filmed live. Please keep in mind while you're watching that all of the recipes that I will be cooking are available in my cookbook, the Healthy Weight Eating Program and Cookbook. This is available online at my website at www.karakroger.com. In addition, I also offer services such as nutritional consulting, grocery store tours, individual and group cooking classes, and laboratory services that can look at nutritional deficiencies and food allergies. I also offer a program called the Healthy Weight Eating Program that is a combination of all of these services. They're all a great way to improve your health and quality of life. I really hope that you enjoy the class today. If you have any questions or would like to follow up in any way, please feel free to email me at kara@karakroger.com. I really hope you enjoy the class. Thank you so much. Take care. All right, well, thank you for coming. And today we're going to talk about healthy meals made easy. So the point of this class is to learn how to prepare meals ahead so that you don't get stuck in a rut and wind up coming home and, eating a half a jar of peanut butter with a half a box of crackers and consuming 2,000 calories possibly in a matter of an hour because you maybe skipped lunch and because you weren't prepared, so you get home and you are ravenous, right? So the goal is to prepare in advance and have some meals ready to go. So I'm going to go over the first couple pages of your handouts here. A lot of the information in the beginning of the packet is gives suggestions on what materials are going to be the best materials to have and freezing suggestions and things like that. So basically, the key word here is making planning a priority. And a lot of us just don't tend to do that, and we need to focus as much as we can on making planning a priority. So one of the ways that I think is the best way to do that is to spend a Saturday afternoon where you prepare 2 or 3 meals at a time, and you basically put it in containers that you can pop in the freezer or put in the fridge and then have ready to go throughout the week. Most foods that you prepare will stay in the refrigerator for 7 days before they're expired. So you can plan on a Sunday, and that can carry you all the way through to the following Saturday as well. So I would just focus on preparing as much as you can, in that time period, and just having everything set up ready to go for the week. Basically, there's a couple of different tools that can make this whole process really easy. So a food processor can make things really, really easy. This is a RoboCoupe, so it's a little bit more of the professional variety of the Cuisinart or food processor. They rock. Those are really fun. Well, that's what I get my kicks on, right, with RoboCoupes. Anyway, but if you don't have a food processor, I do recommend that you invest in one. And it is an investment. They can run anywhere from $90 to $250 and up from there. But they last a really long time. They're great pieces of equipment, and they really do cut your time in the kitchen in half. So if you don't have one of those, I highly suggest that you get one. So a crock pot is another great thing to have. I'm not going to talk a lot about crock pot cooking today. I'm talking more about freezing. But when you have a big family and you've got kids and you just are, going to soccer and doing the ballet and whatever else you got going on, using a crock pot and literally putting something in it, even frozen, in the morning and coming home to a cooked meal can really make things great. And then you can take what you've cooked in the crock pot, put it into some of the containers that you have, and freeze it, as well. So crock pot cooking, there are probably 500 different cookbooks out there on how to make crock pot meals. Unfortunately, a lot of those crock pot meals are not very healthy. So what I suggest is if you do look at some of those books, go through and try to find the recipes that are more vegetable rich and less starchy carbohydrate rich, because those starchy carbohydrates can definitely put on the pounds after a while. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go, the difference between a starchy carbohydrate and a non-starchy carbohydrate, which vegetables fall into what categories. So we'll talk about that more as we go. A toaster oven is a wonderful little thing, just a small toaster oven. I'm not a big fan of the microwave. I don't like the texture that it brings to food when you reheat in there. And there's also kind of questions as to whether it depletes the nutrients in the food more than other forms of cooking. The other thing is that a lot of people use plastics in the microwave, and plastics leach chemicals into our food. So always using glass containers if you are going to use the microwave, or ceramic is very important. But better than that is to just get one of these small toaster ovens. You pop your food in there and you heat it up, and literally it takes just about as much time as using a microwave. So toaster ovens. And if it's just you and you're only cooking for yourself, oftentimes you're just making, 4 half breasts of chicken or whatnot. You can easily pop that in there and not heat up the whole house, which if anybody was here this summer, that's a good thing. So I'm going to talk about the storage containers a little bit. I've put an example over there of the ones that I like to recommend, the Pyrex glass storage containers there. The reason why I like these is because they are made of borosilicate. That glass does not need to be cooled completely. Thawed completely before you put it into a hot oven, okay? Tempered glass, on the other hand, and if anybody's had an experience with this, which I have, you take something cold, the tempered glass cold from the freezer or from the oven, and you put it in an oven, and it shatters into millions of tiny pieces, and it's not fun to clean up, especially if you had some juicy concoction in there. So try to always go for the Pyrex or also the Cymax brands, and that's listed under the food storage containers here, which ones are better for you there. So you want to be able to pull something out. You got to let those let those thaw for a little bit, for a few minutes, and then you can just put it directly into the oven with the frozen content in there, and you'll be all right. Next thing is freezer bags. Everybody has seen Ziploc freezer bags. There is the non-freezer kind and the freezer kind. The non-freezer kind are much more thin than the others, so buying the freezer ones are better to prevent the ice crystals from penetrating the food. And generally, I like to buy different sizes of those bags, so that when you make a sauce, maybe you just want a small batch and you want to freeze a small quantity so that you can just pull out that one bag and have enough for your whatever you're making that day. And then you might want to do big batches for other periods of time. Whenever you are using freezer bags and you're filling them up, it's really nice to fold back the edges. So before you put something in it, in order to not get your zip all gooey, just fold the bag back like that, and then you can easily spoon things into it, and then you flip it back around and you don't have goop preventing you from zipping it again, okay? Another thing that I like to do is keep some ice trays around that are specific for food. You don't want to do the ice ones for food because they can pick up the flavors sometimes. So get some ice trays that are specific, and I do things like make pesto or do small containers of little tomato sauce or whatever like that, and put it into the ice tray, and then you freeze it. Once it's frozen, you want to take it out of the ice tray and put it into a Ziploc baggie, and then you can literally take out those little ice cubes and use it individually for food. So like I said, I do that with pesto, and whenever I steam some green beans or steam some zucchini, whatnot, I just take that 1 cube of pesto, pop it in there, and I don't have to have fresh pesto on hand. Next thing on the list is heavyweight foil. There's various degrees of foil, some thin, some heavier. The heavier it is, the more it's going to protect the food when it's in the freezer. So what you'll want to do is wrap your food in the foil, especially if you know that it's going to be in there for longer. If you're only going to put something in for a day or two, then wrapping it in foil might not be necessary. But if you're going to have it in there for longer than a week or something, you definitely want to wrap it in foil. Get the thicker variety. And then once it's wrapped in foil, put it in one of those Ziploc baggies. Now, I'm a big fan of trying not to overconsume, and when you get into the baggies and the, foil and this and that, you can all of a sudden be making a lot of waste. So when you wrap things in foil, it's nice because then you can reuse those Ziploc baggies. and make less waste, which is important. All right, then there's freezer paper and there's wax paper. Basically, the freezer paper is more protective than wax paper, and you could use freezer paper like instead of foil, for instance, either or. And I haven't used freezer paper a lot. Mostly I've used foil, so I don't have a huge amount of experience with it, but that is available. It is out there. And then wax paper is good for if you do things like make patties ahead of time. You maybe make a bunch of hamburger patties, or maybe you've made some salmon cakes or bean cakes or something of the sort like that. Then you can just layer those and put wax paper in between, and then be able to go into your container and pull out one at a time and cook that one at a time. All right, when you are using these containers and you do put things into the freezer, you want to make sure that you leave a little room at the top, because when things freeze, they expand. So don't fill your containers all the way up to the very top. Make sure that you have a little extra in there as well, a little extra space, so that you can allow for that expansion. We talked about the portioning a little bit when I said using the various size of bags, but when you go to freeze those things, be sure when you're doing the baggies to lay them flat. And then if you want, after they're frozen, you can stack them upright. How many people's freezer is organized? It's something that's really hard to do, to keep the freezer organized, you know, and you just get better at it as you go. But, you know, the concept of laying the baggies flat and then being able to stack them easier and that type of thing, oftentimes we just go throw it in and then we have this like blob here, you know. But also, if you lay it flat, you can defrost easier because, you know, more surface area there, and it will defrost better. So be sure to try and get your freezer organized and get some of those things laid flat. When you're freezing, you want to try to cool the foods down as close to room temperature as possible before you put it into the freezer. That will prevent your temperature from going up inside of the freezer. And so cool as much as you can, then put the lid on it and get it in the freezer. Not all freezers are 0-degree freezers. And so if you are buying a new freezer, be sure to look for one that does go down to 0 degrees, because that's when you're going to get the most crisp freezing capacity. And what you want to do is try to keep it at that 0 degrees. That the lower it is, the better it prevents the ice crystals from forming. If you have a freezer that's at like 21 degrees, for instance, that's only going to keep food for a short period of time, and then you get those crystals forming, and then you know, you get the rubbery texture and that type of thing. So really try to keep that low as much as possible. Additionally, labeling everything. How many people have walked into their freezer and pulled something out and gone, I don't know what this is. So I know I have a number of times. And, you know, a little mystery is not so bad sometimes, but you probably would like to keep a Sharpie around and label. And then what you might also want to do, if you're going to be reusing the Ziploc bags, is have additional labels that you can just put on top of the next, so that you can write on there what you got going on. One more thing before we move on. The more liquid you have covering something, the better it's going to be protected in the freezing. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll make a little extra sauce. Like if I'm going to put some meat in the oven some meat in the freezer to marinate, I will put extra marinade in there so it covers the meat completely. And that way it's protected by the liquid from the ice crystals penetrating the meat as well. So sometimes making a little extra liquid is a good thing. And or sometimes people will just simply, like when they freeze fish, they'll actually just put more water into that so that the fish is protected, because sometimes fish doesn't freeze very well. So they'll put a little water in there, freeze that, and then when they pull it out, they just discard the water and go forward from there. So the next topic is what foods freeze well. And a lot of foods freeze well, and many don't, but proteins all freeze really well. And as a nutritionist, I really emphasize the need for protein in our diet. I generally like to tell people to eat about 25 grams of protein per meal, which is more or less 3 ounces, or the size of your palm there. And protein grounds us and satiates us, and it keeps us from needing to eat over and over and over because those proteins take longer to digest, okay? So really consuming a good amount of protein. Eggs will freeze okay as long as you take them out of the shell. Don't freeze eggs in their shell. But, you know, whipping them up or something like that before you put them in, you can freeze them. And then once they're cooked, not a fried egg, for instance, but a scrambled egg or a frittata like we're going to make today, those will freeze pretty well. Non-starchy vegetables, so the ones that have more fiber in them can actually freeze better than the ones that have a little bit of less fiber in them. So a lot of the cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, all of those can freeze pretty well. And those cruciferous vegetables are really, really beneficial for our health. They actually help to prevent cancer. They have something in them called sulforaphane, and that sulforaphane actually helps upregulate different detoxification pathways in our liver and can help prevent cancer and a number of different health benefits. So just for detoxification in general, which we all need to be doing that on a daily basis. Spinach freezes really well, especially once it's cooked into something. That's fine. Most hard cheeses and butter will freeze well, and nuts and seeds will freeze well. All starches freeze really well. That's just kind of their nature. So grains and beans and winter squashes and the tropical fruits that are high starchy carbohydrate like bananas and mangoes and pineapple, those will all freeze pretty well. And then I've listed some foods that don't freeze well, which are going to be the really water-rich foods. Cucumbers, they don't have a lot of fiber in them, and they're very watery, so they just lose their texture completely. Obviously, lettuces are very similar in that way. And apples tend to get a little mushy. Mayonnaise or emulsions, basically a mayonnaise is emulsion where they combine, you know, the oil and the yolk of the egg and things like that. Those can break when they're frozen. If it's in something, then it's usually all right, but it will break sometimes if you freeze it. So milk and cream and buttermilk and sour cream and yogurt, sometimes if they're in something, they'll do okay, but otherwise not really the best for freezing. Some of the things that don't freeze well in their whole form, when they're pureed, they really will freeze well, like watermelon. Making watermelon popsicles or something like that is a great alternative to a regular popsicle, and you can just freeze some watermelon juice and eat that. Eggplant puree will freeze very nice, but eggplant just in its whole form will not freeze very well. And asparagus soup or something you could freeze. If you make a puree soup, you can often freeze those and be all right. So thawing and reheating, this is the last category. It's best to take the foods out of the freezer and thaw in the refrigerator, just for safety's sake. If you are going to thaw outside of the refrigerator, you got to be careful with temperatures and make sure that you don't put it out before you go to work and then you come home and it's gone down to 70 degrees and been sitting at 70 degrees for a couple hours. 70 degrees is the ideal temperature for bacteria to grow. So you want to just make sure that you don't keep things at that temperature very much. You want to keep it cooler than that as much as possible. 40 degrees being ideal. That's what most refrigerators are. Taking from the freezer and putting in the refrigerator is great, but it can take a long time. And oftentimes you may take meat out 24 hours ahead and it's still not thawed the next day. So if that's the case, then take that meat from the refrigerator, and I usually put it in a nice metal bowl or glass bowl with some water in it. You don't want the water to be really hot, but you want it to be a little bit higher than 70 degrees. And then you only want to allow it to sit in that water to defrost further. And you can allow a little bit of a drip of water to come into the bowl so that the water is circulating a little bit. And in general, you're going to get a very quick defrost in that way. And you can do that even with fully frozen things too. That's usually how I defrost, is just put it in a bowl of water, keep the water circulating, and you only want to do that for a couple hours though, because otherwise you can start fostering bacteria. And you want to make sure that you don't have any holes in your Ziploc bag that could be getting the water into it that could then cause some contamination there. And if you do use a microwave for defrosting, do it in small batches, because otherwise you get, the outside cooked and the inside's completely raw and that type of thing. So another good reason for making the small batches that we talked about there. I've also listed here all of the recipes in my book that are freezable and in what way they can be prepped for freezing as well. So if you do decide to get one of the cookbooks, this is in the cookbook as well, but you've got a double version there.